is Rich Simon. I'm editor of Psychotherapy Networker, and I'd like to welcome you to a very special session at this year's virtual symposium. This is the session devoted to the winner of the 2020 Networker Lifetime Achievement Award, Peter Levine, and to his work and his contribution. Before we bestow the award, I'd just like to read a few observations, a few thoughts about Peter as I was thinking about trying to put his career in some kind of a context. So personally, I had first had the great good fortune to actually see Peter Levine work almost 10 years ago in a demonstration session at an Evolution of Psychotherapy conference. As a chatty, conventionally trained psychotherapist, I must confess that I found much of what I was observing a bit bewildering, particularly the almost total absence what I had spent years learning how to do. There certainly wasn't a lot of talk. Instead of asking a series of questions about the events that led to the client's presenting problem, Peter kept zeroing in with an extraordinary precision on things that were, at least to me, therapeutic incidentals. The woman's breathing patterns, the shifts in her posture, changes in the color of her face, or what had seemed to me a barely perceptible shift in the position of one of her shoulders in relation to the other. Could this micro-focusing on such minutiae be what psychotherapy was supposed to be about? The things that seemed to most catch Peter's attention were things I would have never considered significant enough to notice. And yet, there was simply no way that I could ignore the quality of Peter's presence. He wasn't just paying attention, you'd expect that. No, he was attention. He embodied it, aware of and tracking every nuance of movement, every gesture, every breath the demonstration client was taking. And in response, you could see her right there in front of us begin to emerge from behind her cloud, become more open and vibrant and freer as the session went on. Afterwards, even if I didn't quite understand what I had seen or what Peter was doing, I felt not only that I had observed a master at work, but that I myself had experienced his presence in my body and in my mind. Physically, energetically, at some subtle level, I felt I was walking out of the room a different person than the one who had walked in. I was breathing a little more deeply, moving a little more fluidly. I think I even felt a bit taller. How many psychotherapists are there who can improve your posture by merely watching them at work? Now, when I was in graduate school, the idea that you could approach psychological healing through the body would have seemed, frankly, a very odd notion. You were supposed to do therapy as if clients had no bodies. Clients were, officially speaking, nothing but minds floating somewhere within or above the forgotten physical machinery that had brought them to the session in the first place. The idea that you could do psychotherapy from the bottom up rather than the top down, these are phrases that our honoree has made very familiar to this audience, that you could focus on your client's physical being and the sensations they felt in their bodies rather than exclusively on what they thought and said seemed, at that point, completely outlandish. After all, it isn't called talk therapy for nothing. But over the course of his career, Peter Levine has spent little time using the familiar language of psychotherapy. Instead, he has developed a more subtle, still to me, somewhat mysterious language of the body and its sensations, and it's a language that few of us have been trained to understand. Over the past several decades, Peter has elevated body-oriented psychotherapy to a once unimaginable place of acceptance within the wider field of psychotherapy. As much as anyone in our field, he has transformed our most fundamental ideas about how to understand what goes on inside us when we get disoriented and dysregulated. His work has been an enormous factor in helping therapists recognize how in the process of emotional healing, thinking and talking have their limitations. He has taught us that for therapy to be effective, we need to help people regulate their core physiological functions, something which doesn't usually occur through words and language alone. During the course of his career, those ideas have seemed dangerous and taboo to many people within this field. But he has been undeterred. He has unfailingly displayed the conviction and determination that has made him a pioneer in charting out a different kind of therapeutic path, a path that has fundamentally transformed our field and how we understand the processes of human healing. So this morning, it's my great honor to be able to give Peter the Networker's 2020 Lifetime Achievement Award. Peter, on behalf of all the people whose lives and work you've transformed, thank you for your extraordinary contribution to our field. And now, as you receive your Lifetime Achievement Award, I'd like all of us out there to, even in your virtual form, to stand up and for all of us to imagine a huge standing ovation for one of the true pioneers in our field. Peter, thank you for all the contributions you have made to our profession.
Rich, thank you very much for that generous introduction. I was truly touched. And I think one of the things that I tend to minimize about myself is what a struggle it was to put all of this together in a way that could be taught and passed on to others. And people have at different times described me as a almost mystical, shamanic healer, and it's been my life purpose to prove them wrong. What I mean by that is, and I've studied cross-cultural shamanism, and I've had the opportunity to meet and spend some time with shamans in different parts of the world. But the key here for me was to be able to qualify and quantify the work in a scientific way and in a pedagogical way so it could be taught. And I began my teaching with a group of about 12 bright Berkeley therapists who would meet every couple of weeks at my treehouse. They called it my treehouse. It was in the forest there in Wildcat Canyon in Berkeley. And our task was to try to really codify what I was doing and to get a better language for it so it could be transmissible. So I think in some ways I've been successful, because if I think about it, in my mind actually, and this kind of reminds me of what you were talking about, Rich, in my mind I'm sitting right here in that Berkeley house with those 12 bright therapists, Berkeley therapists, and that's how I see my place in moving the work out into the world. And what I think maybe has a little bit disproved that this was something that was just a gift of mine and not something that could bring out gifts of many, many, many others. So even though I still think of it right now as the 12 people in this room, it's now spread to 42 countries. We have, I think, about 40 or 50 teachers who have taught about 50,000 students worldwide. So in a way, I feel that my task has been done, that I've done enough, and even more than that, that I am enough. And I've written a number of books, which again help to transmit the transmit the word, and not just for this generation, but for generations to come. Because I believe what I tapped upon was some universal truths about healing, about our vitality, our life energy, and how to bring that out in people as part of their healing. And friends of mine have been encouraging me to write a little bit of my story of my life, because if I reflect back on it, it's pretty interesting. And there's a saying, it's a Jewish saying that says, "What is truer than truth? Answer the story." And then I start. We all have our stories to tell, and this is mine. It is my truth. Like the Russian dolls, it's a story, like the nesting Russian dolls, it's a story folded into several others. And as my friend Ian said, the shortest distance between 2 points is not necessarily a straight line. Here is the beginning arc of my nested story. This essay is about my soul's journey. It is the often lonely path taken by an unsuspecting and unlikely prophet. So let me begin with my beginnings. So actually, I think I'll start with something that happened actually in 2005. And please excuse me from reading from my book. I understand that that's really something that's frowned upon, but I can't say it better without reading some of it. When I wrote in an unspoken voice, one of the things that I did is I consulted the I Ching, and I don't know if you know what the I Ching is, but it's a book of tremendous wisdom. It goes back nearly 5,000 years, and you throw coins, or you can do something with yarrow sticks, and it takes you to a page in this book. It's a really big book, and then it takes you to other secondary changes. It's called the Book of Changes, the I Ching, the Book of Changes. So when I started to write the book, I sought the counsel of this wise prophet, and the coins I threw took me to what I call roots, a foundation to dance on. So here is I Ching hexagram 34, the well. We must go down to the very foundations of life. For any merely superficial ordering of life that leaves its deepest needs unsatisfied is as ineffectual as if no attempt at order had ever been made. And by the way, I'm a fan of a lot of the different kinds of therapies like CBT and especially CPT. I think there's a lot of useful things there, but if we don't get what's underneath this, Rich, you talked about bottom-up processing. If we don't get the place to really put our lever, Archimedes was said to have said, "Give me a place to put my lever and I'll move the world." And so this is the inner landscape of one's introspective and energetic awareness of themselves as a living, pulsing human being. So, Chapter 1, the power of an unspoken voice. When a man has learned within his heart when a man has learned within his heart what fear and trembling mean, he is safeguarded against any terror produced by outside influences. When a man has learned within his heart what fear and trembling mean, he is safeguarded against any terror produced by outside influences. And we are dealing with these outside influences right now in a big way, in a profound way. And I plan to address this also in my short talk today, because these are tools that we all need and that we can also teach to our clients and our friends and our families and our colleagues to help move through this time of fear with courage and pride and dignity. Okay, from chapter 1. No matter how self-assured we are, In a fraction of a second, our lives can be utterly devastated. As in the biblical story of Jonah, the unknown forces of trauma and loss can swallow us whole, thrusting us deep into their cold, dark belly. Entrapped, yet lost, we become helplessly frozen by terror and helplessness. Early in the year 2005, I walked out of my house into a balmy Southern California morning. The gentle warmth and soft sea breeze gave a lift to my step. Certainly this was the kind of winter morning that makes everyone in the rest of the country, with the possible exception of Gerson Keeler from Lake Wobegon, and maybe he does as well, want to abandon their snow shovels and move to the Southland's warm, sunny beaches. It was the beginning of a perfect kind of day, a day when you feel certain that nothing can go wrong. But it did. In a moment of truth, I walked along being absorbed in happy anticipation of being with my dear friend Butch for the celebration of his birthday, 60th birthday. I stepped out into the crosswalk. The next moment, paralyzed and numb, I'm lying on the road, unable to move or breathe. I can't figure out what has just happened. How did I get here? Out of a swirling fog of confusion and disbelief, a crowd of people rushes towards me. They stop aghast. Abruptly, they hover over me in a tightening circle, their staring eyes fixed on my limp and twisted body. From my helpless perspective, they appear like a flock of carnivorous ravens swooping down on an injured prey, me. Slowly, I orient myself and identify the real attacker. As in an old-fashioned flashbulb photo, I see a beige car looming over me with its teeth-like grille and shattered windshield. The door suddenly jerks open. A wide-eyed teenager bursts out. She stares at me in dazed horror. In a strange way, I know and don't know what has happened. As the fragments begin to converge, they convey a horrible reality. I must have been hit by this car as I entered the crosswalk. When this happened, I was in a dissociated state for sure, because I remember an off-duty paramedic came by and commanded me not to move my neck, but as I oriented towards where the sound was coming from, he said again, "Don't move, your neck can be broken." And then I experienced this bizarre dislocation. I mean, I've worked with thousands and thousands of clients where something like this happens in their sessions, where I was literally out of my body, looking down on my limp, twisted body, and feeling kind of a neutral sadness almost, but also a neutrality at this poor man that was just hit by the car. Thankfully, a young woman came by and announced herself as a doctor, a pediatrician, actually, she said. And I remember thinking in the kind of the funny part of my brain, that's the perfect specialty. This is exactly what I need right now. And she asked me, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And I said, "Yes, please stay here with me." And she sat down on the pavement by my side and took my hand in her hand and squoze it gently. And in that moment, I could sense, I could see the part of me that was outside of my body come back into my body. And I started to have tears and shaking and trembling and waves of shaking and trembling, and where I would turn icy cold or warm, where I'd feel burning hot. There was like a red hot emotion of rage, and it was like this damn kid, how come she didn't stop? Why did she go through the crosswalk? Absolutely fury. But the shaking and the trembling went on for at least 30 or 40 minutes. And again, the woman was there with me. And having developed this work, and literally worked with tens of thousands of people over the years, I know what to do. But I don't know if I could have done it alone. I would have needed this other person, this empathic witness, to be there and to help hold that space. You know, there's a Motown saying, it takes one to stay in the dark alone. It takes two to let the light shine through. And in therapy, we really gift our clients when we can bring our presence into the arena of the therapeutic exchange. And it's not something that's simple or trivial. It really is about how to get present, and literally present in our bodies. So let's go and talk a little about this theme of fear and courage, especially in these times of tremendous fear and uncertainty. So, yes. I say that our ultimate survival and our salvation, our very salvation, is to be neither complacent in this time, nor paralyzed with fear, in other words, panic, but rather to find inner balance within ourselves and with each other. And this here is where we have a choice. It doesn't have to be a panic-demic instead of just a pandemic. A book that many of you have read, and it was filmed actually in a good movie, made a good movie out of it. A book called The Life of Pi by Jan Martel. And the proponent says, I must say a word about fear. It is life's only true opponent. Only fear can defeat life. Fear is clever, treacherous adversary. How well I know. There's another thing I'd like us to change in our discourse. We shouldn't be talking about social distancing, but rather about physical distancing. And what we're doing here today, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of people are viewing this, but we are connecting. We are connecting in this social way. This is critical. So please, let's just call it physical distancing, and the importance of social connection in many different forms. Yes, to be separate and yet connected, like a bridge over troubled water. I will lay me down. I want to talk a little bit also about styles of leadership. After 9/11, when the planes flew into the World Trade Center and destroyed those buildings and created terror throughout the whole nation, some months after that, I was giving a lecture in Boulder, and at the end of the lecture, a woman came up and said, we would like you to come to a think tank on terrorism. And it's going to be at the Sandia Labs. It's a very top high security lab where they make a lot of the triggers for hydrogen bombs and all kinds of things like that. But there's a part that's called the Advanced Concept Group. So anyhow, there are about 25 of us that were invited to this, and we went around saying a little bit about who we were and what we were doing here. And so there was people from the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Defense, and all kinds of other places like that. And then there's me, the odd fellow out. So when it came to me, I announced my name and just said a little teeny bit about my work. And then I said, but I have no idea really why you invited me. You must have had something in mind. And the leader of the conference said, yes, you are going to be heading the TTOT division. Take the terror out of terrorism. And again, that's what we have to do. We have to find ways to move through the terror and reconnect with ourselves and with others. And one of the things that I said is that what's essential to quell panic is to have leaders that people trust. And I'm sadly afraid we don't have that right now. And I believe as much as anything that's feeding into the level of disturbance and fear that's permeating the country. Nancy Pelosi said on the floor of the House, "We are the captains of the ship. We are the last to leave." Contrast this to a congressional representative, also on the House, who came in wearing a gas mask for emphasis and said, "We are human petri dishes." What is the implicit message here? I mean, this is not something that's going to help people settle. This is something that makes people even more stirred up. You know, it's like, this is like germ warfare. It's not what it is. Yeah. Ah, yes. Courage, I truly believe, is not about the absence of fear, but the capacity to act, and to act creatively in the presence of fear. To listen to music. I was thinking last night they had on the TV Yo-Yo Ma doing what he calls songs of comfort. So listen to music, music that you love. Prepare meals together of the people that you're living with. When possible, move and dance with your inner rhythms and connect through dance and movement with the others, even if it's virtually. Knowledge also, this is a Papua New Guinea saying, and I just absolutely love it. Knowledge is useless until it lives in the body. So we're talking about embodying, and again in the introduction, Rich talked about my emphasis on really learning and watching and observing these small changes and bringing up my skills. You know, and I did this when I was developing somatic experiencing. I did this week after week, month after month, year after year. And as Yogi Berra, the famous or infamous catcher for the New York Yankees, said, definitely a personal story, a personal hero of mine, he said, you can observe a lot just by watching. And that's what I did. And that's what I learned, to really see what was going on inside the person's organism, to bring their attention to their interoceptive landscapes. Okay, so again, the importance of credible leadership in times of crisis. This is, I think you probably recognize, this is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And this was at the beginning of World War II. And he said these profound words: "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." Indeed, his wife, Eleanor, said it this way: "You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You are able to say to yourself, I have lived through this horror. I can take the next thing that comes along. You must do the thing you think you cannot do." Eleanor Roosevelt. This is another person who is utterly trustworthy. maybe not all of you know who it is. It's a broadcaster named Walter Cronkite. Tremendously present human being, very aware of not only what's going on in the world, but how that's affecting people. And his ability to give the facts, well, that's what we need. We need to know, what we don't know, and to know that who that person is, that spokesperson, and it should be really one person, that they will give us this information, new information, as soon as it occurs, as soon as we know a little bit more. And again, unfortunately, that's something that's not really happening, although it does seem to be somewhat improving. So here is what happened the day that Kennedy shot in 1963. And it starts by showing the soap opera that was on television, As the World Turns. Probably most of you don't remember that. I hesitantly will acknowledge that I had seen it, but this is what happened in 1963. Get the music.
And now for the next 30 minutes, As the World Turns.
For viewers of the CBS soap opera, As the World Turns, first word came at about 1:40 p.m. Eastern Time. It happened too quickly for cameras to be in place.
And I gave it a great deal of thought, Grandpa.
To the soap opera, but not for long. Soon after, Walter Cronkite was back, reporting from the CBS newsroom, complete with rotary telephones and wire machines.
This picture has just been transmitted by wire. It is a picture taken just a moment or two before the incident. If you can zoom in with that camera, we can get a closer look at this picture.
And almost exactly 1 hour after his initial bulletin, this now famous announcement.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President
Waters to bridge us together and to bridge us to ourselves. His willingness to be emotional, I think, helped thaw the emotions of millions and millions of Americans. Whoop. Yeah, let me just, maybe I'll come back to this, but the importance of visceral experience, of somatic awareness. And in this time, I suggest that maybe you experience some of your deeper yearnings, and then acting on those without being invested in the outcome. And to be creative, to paint, to draw, to write, to sing, to play, to cry. So I'll be saying more about this in my afternoon workshop, but I want to talk a little bit about the nature of fear, or the structure of fear, the psychophysiology of fear. And Binet, around the turn of not this century, but the last century, asked the question, qu'est-ce qu'une émotion? What is an emotion? And in somatic experiencing, we have a map for the person's inner experience, and it's called SIBAM. And S stands for sensation, internal sensations, bodily sensations. So muscle tensions, joint perception, visceral movements, autonomic visceral movements, changes in blood flow, changes in heart rate, and so forth. Then you have images, I, and that's not just visual images, but sound images, word images, and so forth. In other words, what comes from outside into our inner experience, which is the inner experience again, is S. Then B are behaviors, and we'll come back to that in a minute. A are affects, and affects include the categorical emotions of Charles Darwin. So things like anger, fear, sadness, disgust, surprise, that Darwin felt, and Paul Ekman extended that work, that this is characteristic of all people everywhere in the world. I don't think that's completely true, because I think there are very different relationships that people do have with their inner world, their emotional world. But it's a platform that's important. Okay, but A also refers to what sometimes are called contours of feeling, felt sense feelings. So you see somebody that you haven't seen for a while and you're filled with gladness. Well, gladness isn't a categorical emotion. It's not anger, it's not fear, it may not even be joy. It's gladness, so glad to see you, and that's a physiological experience. Or if you walk out in the morning and you see the dew on a blade of grass, and you just see the absolute unspeakable beauty of it, or a painting in a museum. These are all affects, and they're very important in our life. Then M stands for meanings. So the meaning is what we describe to the experience that I've just been outlining in the last couple of minutes. And when a person has been traumatized, the meanings aren't fluid anymore. They become fixed as fixed beliefs, like nothing good will ever happen, something bad's going to happen to me. I'm unlikable, I'm unlovable. All of these voices that we hear in our heads. So the idea is to really be able to help the client experience their inner landscape because the SIAM are only things that the client or the person can experience. The therapist can't know that except as they report it. And behaviors, however, are what the therapist can observe and use that to reflect back to the client. So, for example, the gesture I'm making right now in talking to you, it's semi-involuntary, but it's not really. I can change it. I'm using it to try to communicate and get a point across, that kind of thing. So it's a voluntary movement. But also I'm expressing emotions on my face, and that's less voluntary. So I'm going from the most voluntary to the less and least voluntary. So the emotional expression of the face. But then there were very subtle changes, as Rich was mentioning, in posture. And it's not about, standing up straight or something like that, or, don't be like this. It really is looking at these minute adjustments that the body is making moment to moment to moment. Then the other things that we're able to observe as behaviors are the person's heart rate, for example, by looking at the carotid pulse. We can see when the heart rate goes up or when it becomes not variable, when it just is exactly the same. I think this is called heart rate variability. You can observe that. Again, you can observe a lot just by watching. And then, and then you can see color changes. And again, those are all autonomic shifts. Again, what's going on in the bottom, what's going on in the brainstem and the cerebellum and the limbic system, the emotional brain, all of these things we can learn to perceive as behaviors, subtle behaviors, but learnable skills to observe these behaviors. There was a person, when I started to develop the work in the 70s, in those days, it was before computers, so I would spend many a day in the graduate library stacks at UC Berkeley. And so I would find myself in one part of the stacks and I would see an interesting book and then I would pick it up and I'd look at it and I'd read it and I said, this is an interesting session. So then I would try and go and take another book, and I brought my sandwiches so I could spend the whole day there. And one day I came across a book by a woman named Nina Bull. It was called The Attitude Theory of Emotion. And I talk quite a bit about it in an unspoken voice. And what she observed is basically exactly what I was observing. So she trained people to begin to be aware of what's going on in their bodies. She also trained observers, in the way probably that I was training therapists, to be able to observe and record what they were observing. When they were asked to imagine different emotions like anger, fear, sadness, joy, I think. Oh no, I think pride. No, that's one I added. Okay, yeah. But anyhow, what she showed is when the person's body is in one particular emotional state, no other emotion can be experienced until the person deconstructs that emotion, and then they can then enter into a different emotion. So being stuck in fear, you know, our eyes are wide open. I mean, not everybody's eyes are wide open in fear. The pupils may dilate. The heart rate may accelerate. Again, all of these things are things that we can observe, and we can help the person learn not only to experience them, but to move through them so they can then find the unfolding next posture. So, thank you, Nina Bull. And she was one of the people that really gave me support into developing somatic experiencing, because I was really, at that time, a lone voice. And as Rich indicated, sometimes I was, I don't say exactly threatened, sometimes I was ignored. That was kind of the worst for me. But other times people said that this was dangerous, that this should not be involved in any kind of psychotherapy and so forth, because it involved the body, God forbid. So, but anyhow, again, in receiving this award, one of the reasons why it's very special to me, Rich, and to all of you, is that I now know that it is in the mainstream, that it is the mainstream. And that's not going to change. Probably around the year, probably about 15 years ago, that shift started to happen, and I think at this point it has happened. You know, and people have been writing about it. You know, my very dear friend and one of my first clients in Berkeley was a neurologist named Bob Scare, and he wrote 2 excellent books, one called The Body Bears the Burden, and then the other one is The Trauma Spectrum. His name is SCAER, got a name for a neurologist. And then, of course, Bessel van der Kolk in his work, The Body Keeps the Score. It's now out in the culture, and it's just a matter of teaching these skills. And I'll tell you, at first, it seemed maddening. You know, people report, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what I'm supposed to see. But you know what? When they practice it, as they do in the SE trainings, the somatic experiencing trainings, as they do that, they get it at different times. Some people get it almost right away. Some people, it takes time. I remember there was one cognitive behavioral therapist in Denver who was in the Boulder training. And after the first sequence, first year, I suggested that he maybe just, you know, see what skills he might have learned and what use they might be in his therapy, and, you know, maybe not to take the next. And he said, no, I want to do the next intermediate level. The end of that is kind of the same thing. Are you sure that you don't want to just kind of stop it from here and, you know, see what happens? He said, no, I'm really interested in this now. And then anyhow, he turned out to be one of the most gifted SE therapists. And many of the therapists would get supervision from him or refer very difficult clients to him. So it's, again, it's a learnable skill. It truly is. Yes. I think, again, this is something that's been lost here, or hasn't been proposed enough, hasn't been put out in, through our leaders, that we really need to maintain social engagement because it's a buffer against fear and helplessness. So here's an example of social connection with physical distance. And some of you may have seen this. Have enough volume there? Everybody's a musician. Everybody's an artist. And of course you know this is happening in Italy. Where else? Little kid just jumping for joy. And, and I think about this in terms of what my really very, very dear friend and colleague, actually my brother really, Stephen Porges, talks about how important social engagement is in regulating the nervous system. And so again, I think we should change the discourse from physical proximity to social closeness in every form that it takes. And I'm reminded, I spend a lot of time in Switzerland, usually during the summer months, and there's a horn. It looks a little bit, you know, like those big, long Tibetan horns. It's called the Alp horn. And the sheep herders who are up for many weeks, even months during the summer without contact with others, grazing their sheep. And they sing to each other with the Alp horn. So let me just play this a little bit here. And you can just hear it from valley to across the valleys, each talking to the other in some kind of emotional Morse code. And they yodel with the horn. Really being in with this music, feeling into it, letting your body gently move with the music. Feel your guts, feel your chest, feel your breath, feel your hands, your feet. Your body move just a little bit, just finding where it wants to move from and just allowing that impulse to move you, to move your body, to move your soul. Have some very, very dear friends who live up in the high Alps in Switzerland, and we spend time with them most every summer. And it's just it's an experience that you just don't know anywhere else in the world, or I don't. To be there in those mountains with the mountain people, with the very simple but very thoughtful, intelligent people, and bound by traditions, but also being out in the world. I mean, you know, the children there are as tech savvy as kids almost anywhere, but they also retain their traditions of music and dance. It's just dear time to spend that with them. And anyhow, somebody, I think it was a Italian monk, sent them the following poem, which I'd like to conclude by reading. It's called Lockdown. Yes, there is fear. Yes, there is isolation. Yes, there is panic buying. Yes, there is sickness. Yes, there is even death. But they can say that in one, after so many years of noise, you can hear the birds again. They say that after just a few weeks of quiet, the sky is no longer thick with fumes, but blue and gray and clear. They say that in the streets of Assisi, people are singing to each other across the empty squares, keeping their windows open so that those who are alone may hear the sounds of family around them. They say that a hotel in the west of Ireland is offering free meals and delivery to the housebound. Today, a young woman I know is busy spreading flyers with her number through the neighborhood so that elders may have someone to call on. Today, churches, synagogues, mosques, and temples are preparing to welcome and shelter the homeless, the sick, the weary, a bridge over troubled waters. All over the world, people are slowing down and reflecting. All over the world, people are looking at their neighbors in a new way. All over the world, people are waking up to a new reality, to how big, how expansive we really are, to how little control we really have, to what really matters, to love. So we pray and we remember that, yes, there is fear, but there does not have to be hate. Yes, there is isolation, but there does not have to be loneliness. Yes, there is panic buying, but there does not have to be meanness. Yes, there is sickness, but there does not have to be disease of the soul. Yes, there can even be death. But there can always be a rebirth of love. Wake to the choices you make as to how to live now. Today, breathe. Listen behind the factory noise of your panic. The birds are singing again. The sky is clearing. Spring is coming. And we are always encompassed by love. Open the windows of your soul, and though you may not be able to touch across the empty square, sing, sing, and move, I would like to add.